Hi, I think we can start, right? Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you for being here and thank you for participating on the Universal Basic Income Workshop. We are in our sixth panel and we are very happy with the discussions that have been carried out so far. And we are excited with the ones that are to come with the sixth, seventh, and eighth panel. I hope you are enjoying it as much as we are. I am Andrea from Universidade Federal Fluminense, UFI. I'll be the chair of this panel. And I'd like to introduce you to the speakers, Paul Katz from the Jain Family Institute, Roberta Costa and Fernando Freitas, both from UFI. They are part of the Maricá's Basic Income Research Team, and they will be talking about the preliminary results of the qualitative portion of the Maricá Basic Income Research. The speakers will have 40 minutes for their presentation. That will be followed by a 20-minute commentary by the exceptional Massimiliano Mollona from Goldsmiths College, University of London. Thank you for being here. And the speakers will have some time to respond to the comments, and then we will open up for a Q&A and a debate session where we encourage the members of the audience to raise questions in Portuguese or in English, however you feel more comfortable. If necessary, we will translate the questions. And yeah, you can, if you'd like to ask the questions orally, you can let us know in the chat, or you can just write down your questions in the chat, and when the time comes, we'll read them for the participants to answer. So for the speakers and the commentators, when there's 5 minutes left to your time, I will let you know. And without further ado, I will now pass the word to the speakers. Thank you.
Thank you, Roberta. Andrea. And boa tarde. Essa sessão será apresentada em inglês. Quem quiser me ouvir em português, pode selecionar o canal desse idioma no Zoom, ali no botão inferior, onde tem um globo. Meu agradecimento prévio ao trabalho dos intérpretes responsáveis pela tradução simultânea durante a sessão. So now I switch to English. Good afternoon. Before starting this presentation, I like to say this event is a product of cooperation between Jain Family Institutes and Universidade Federal Fluminense, UF, that started on July 2019. Just after Maricá announced its basic income program, the planning work started, and even with the pandemic postponing few phases, we were able to conduct parts of our research during the pandemic. We'd like to thank Michael Stein, CEO of GFI, as well as Leandro Ferreira, head of the Brazilian Basic Income Network, for making this research partnership possible. We'd like to thank also Senator Suplicy for his incredible perseverance and advocacy on basic income in Brazil. Without him, we wouldn't be discussing basic income in Brazil. So we'd like to dedicate this event to his 80th birthday. That was on this Monday. Now, proceeding to presentation contents, we'd like to thank our research colleagues for building an amazing work environment: Fabio, Siria, Johannes, Steve, Marcela, Sara, Andrea, Jessica, Igor, and Rodrigo. And last, I'd like to thank Roberta and Paul for all this ongoing work on the qualitative research. Roberto will now start presentation.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Fernando. So as Andrea mentioned, we're going to be presenting our preliminary findings from one of the qualitative studies we are doing. But I would like to say a few words about the first part of our title that says basic income is Mombuca. While we were doing the interviews and also in our groundwork in Maricá, we were struck by the fact that only a small number of people refer to Maricá's basic program by its official name, Citizens Basic Income. People usually call it by two other names. They call it sometimes as Bolsa Mombuca, which you could translate to something like Mombuca Stipend, or Cartão Mombuca, which you could translate to Mombuca card. And we are actually going to be talking about this today. We were very excited when we realized that our data allowed us to explore the different names associated with the program and how the program's shifting frame over the years has affected this. And one thing that we have found is that at this point, it's almost impossible to separate the program and the Mombuca social currency. Hence, we chose this name of basic income is Mombuca. Next slide, please. Just a brief overview of our presentation. We're going to give you some information about the timeline of the basic income program and the whole infrastructure that makes it possible to exist. And also we're going to give a little details about the methods that we employed in this analysis. Then we're going to jump right into the results. First, we're going to be talking about how the city used the Mumbuka as a local development strategy. And then we're going to have a broader discussion about the solidarity economy as a state project. And we're going to discuss next the place of basic income in this project. And last but not least, we are going to be discussing the different coexistence, the different and coexistence of distinct frameworks for understanding Maricá's basic income program. And then we're going to have our concluding remarks. Now I'm going to pass the mic to Paul. Paul, I think you are on mute.
Okay, yes, my apologies. I lost the screen share briefly. This is actually very difficult to navigate on one screen. My apologies for that. So we thought we'd begin with a brief kind of overview of the history of the program that we're going to be discussing as an opportunity to pull out some of the major themes and then offer kind of a global overview of the infrastructure before we dive into these extremely rich interviews that are going to be the source base for our discussion today. So everything that we are talking about began in June 2013 with the creation of Maricá's Solidarity Economy Program, which included the Banco Mumbuka, the Mumbuka Bank, as well as the Mumbuka local currency. Then in December of 2013, a distinct program within the Solidarity Economy Program was launched. This was called the Mumbuka Minimum Income, Renda Minimum Mumbuka. Under which several thousand of Maricá's poorest households began to receive 70 to 85 Mumbukas per month. And a very important reference here, an inspiration for this and kind of a model, is the Banco Palmas, which is a community bank that was founded in 1998 in Fortaleza and had its own local currency called the Palma. So that's the first of three major influences that are going to be threaded throughout our discussion today. Next item on the timeline, in July 2014, was the creation of a distinct secretariat, the Solidarity Economy Secretariat, which was created to manage the Solidarity Economy Program. And here, a critical reference was the economist Paul Singer, who was, under Lula's presidency, the first national secretary of the Solidarity Economy. So this model for kind of a distinct bureaucratic infrastructure really comes from there. Finally, in December 2015, a new program called Citizens Basic Income, or Renda Básica de Cidadania, was created as a supplement to the minimum income program. And recipient households under this program received an extra supplement of 10 Mumbukas per month. And an important reference for this program is Senator Eduardo Suplicy, who is the author of the 2004 Basic Income Law in Brazil, which also used this same name. All of these things, by the way, it's important to mention, happened during the mayoralty of Washington Quaqua, who was mayor of Maricá from January 1st, 2009 to January 1st, 2017, and is in many ways the person who deserves the most credit for this suite of programs in Maricá. Then he was followed in office by Fabiano Horta, who is currently the mayor of Maricá. And a couple developments under Horta are worth pointing out here as well. So in June 2019, the two existing programs that we already discussed, Renda Mínima and Citizens Basic Income, or RBC, were combined into a new unified program under the Renda Básica de Cidadania name. And this program began paying a total of 130 Mumbukas, not per household, as had been the case before, but instead per individual. Then, at the end of 2019, a massive registration push brought more than 42,000 individuals into the basic income program. Finally, in March 2020, in response to the COVID-19 pandemic, Maricá temporarily increased monthly basic income payments to 300 Mambucas per month, and it implemented additional new emergency programs for businesses and self-employed workers paid in Mambucas. And these increased payments have been maintained at least through next month. I mentioned that the solidarity economy has a kind of complex infrastructure in Maricá, and we wanted just to offer a kind of global overview of that infrastructure with this chart, which is a little bit complex, but I'm just going to highlight a couple things about it. So you can see the Banco Mambuca is right here in the center. The Banco Mambuca receives money from the Solidarity Economy Secretariat, which is here at the upper left in this oval. You can see that it receives funds to cover benefit payments to recipients of solidarity economy programs, and it also receives money to cover some of its operating expenses. The Banco Mambuca, in turn, makes benefit payments to recipients of these social programs, which are here in the bottom left corner. Some of them are basic income recipients, and then there are recipients of other solidarity economy programs that are also paid in Mambucas. These beneficiaries, in turn, use their Mambucas to acquire goods and services at local businesses, which are represented here in this gray oval at the bottom right of the screen. These businesses are enrolled to accept payments in Mambucas at the Banco Mambuca, where they have distinct accounts. And those accounts are then credited with an amount of money equivalent to the purchases made using the Mambuca benefits. It's also worth mentioning very briefly that there are some other benefit programs through the Solidarity Economy Secretariat that are paid in reais, and these are represented here with this dashed line off to the side. So it's a lot of information here on this chart. We haven't explained all of its components, but just to give you a sense of how the infrastructure works overall. And now, with this chart out of the way, I'll turn it back to Roberta to talk a little bit about the methods.
So just very briefly, we interviewed so far 10 people with semi-structured interviews between November 2020 and May 2021. They were all done online because of the pandemic, and we talked with key figures in the city. Most of these people were involved in the RBC program in different capacities. So we talked, for instance, with elected officials and politicians associated to the city government, municipal secretaries, and street-level bureaucrats from the Mambuca Bank and Solidarity Economy Secretariat. We used individual scripts prepared using a modular instrument built by an interdisciplinary team. So, for instance, Fernando and I are both economists, and Paul is a historian. And we elaborated this instrument with the support of an interdisciplinary advisory board, including sociologists and political scientists. The interviews were about an hour and a half long. And this is actually the first time we are working through the source space. So we're very excited and we're very grateful to any and all comments you might have. And at this time, what we did was we analyzed the data searching for common themes. And also, I would like to mention that, like I said in the beginning, this is only part of the qualitative study we are doing in the Maricá basic income evaluation. There are other 2 additional qualitative components to this that we're not going to discuss today. But we are still going to do 20 more semi-structured leader interviews in which we're going to be talking with business owners and journalists. And we're also going to have structured interviews with 60 recipients and non-recipients, which we plan to do this year. These other qualitative parts will allow us to answer different questions than the ones we're going to discuss today. So we just wanted to let you guys know that we maybe in the seminar next year, we'll be presenting results from them as well. Before we go into the results, I just want to mention something. One of our team, one of the people from our team has shared in the chat a PDF from our presentations. And we're going to start showing you some quotes from the interviews we did, and these quotes are in English in the presentation, but in the PDF that we share in the chat, you can actually see these quotes in Portuguese. Next slide, please, Paul. So let's dive in talking about the Mombuca's local development strategy. So Maricá has three crucial problems. These were all mentioned by the majority of the people who have spoken with. And these are actually also problems that are documented in the regional economics literature. Maricá is what we usually call a cidade dormitório. I think in English you could say a bedroom community, which is a name given to cities where a large number of residents work or study in nearby cities. So, for instance, as Natalia Ciamarella says in this quote right here, Natalia is the financial director from Mombuca Bank. She says, many people work in other municipalities and live in Maricá. This kind of phenomena can create a general lack of belonging and identity to the city, and can also contribute to the other two issues listed here, which is Maricá has a low level of production and also has a problem of generating income and employment that stays in the city. So, next slide. The Mombuca actually comes as a way of dealing with these issues. Since the Mombuca can only be used in Maricá, the money can leave the city, which helps boost the local economy, becoming an important tool for local development. Initially, the government was drawn to the idea of a local currency aiming to address these issues. As we can see from this quote from Nathan Mello, he explains the logic behind the implementation of the Mombuca. He says, look, we need the money. He says that the logic was, look, we need the money to stay in the city. What is the way we can do this? And although that was the thinking in 2013, we can see through the interviews that that the people from the city have actually changed their perspective. They now believe that the Mombuca currency is a crucial aspect to the basic income program and to the city itself. Next slide. And another notion that comes through in the interviews is that the structure that the city has developed, the Mombuca Bank and the Mombuca currency, has the potential to promote an economy and financial system centered on local production. As exemplified by this quote from Joaquim de Mello, who is from the Brazilian network of community banks, the Mombuca Bank can be a great asset to this endeavor because community banks are rooted in the ideals of solidarity economy, and they are focused on developing local economies. So a very practical example of this, the Mombuca Bank already has credit lines, for instance, for cooperatives and entrepreneurs with more accessible interest rates than commercial banks. So it's clear that community banks are more invested in helping the local community than, for instance, commercial banks. Next slide. So moving on to a broader discussion about the solidarity economy as a state project. As Paul mentioned before, this whole project began in Maricá with when Washington Kwakwa became mayor in 2009. And this whole logic of solidarity economy still exists in the current administration. But it's interesting to note that there are very different kind of ways of thinking of solidarity economy, and we can see in these quotes that these administrations and the policies designed by them operate under different and coexisting notions of this solidarity economy, which are marked by ideas of social development, of redistribution of wealth, and also of equity. Next slide. Sorry. It's also possible to see that the concept of solidarity economy being developed in Maricá it's broader than the expression usually entails. So here in this slide, we have 2 quotes from Washington Kwakwa, the former mayor, and we can see the logic behind it. As he mentions in the first quote, he says, "A state that participates in the economy." And also, it's really interesting when we look at the second quote, for instance, where he says, the solidarity economy needs to be a part of the grand scheme of the larger economy. So you can see here the idea that the solidarity economy is not something that necessarily has to be implemented in a small scale. It can be brought to life as a state project. And we can see this actually manifesting in Maricá in other policies beyond the basic income. For instance, they have the municipal bus system that doesn't charge a fare, and also are working with companies with public capital aiming to encourage cooperatives. Next slide. And we also wanted to highlight, like Paul mentioned in the beginning, that since the beginning of this project, since 2013, we see that there was an inclination to institutionalized solidarity economy. So as Paul mentioned, the Solidarity Economy program was created in 2013, and it was initially run by the Secretariat of Human Rights, but a visit from Paul Singer actually led to the creation of the Secretariat of Solidarity Economy in 2014, which has become essential in carrying out these programs. Now I'm going to pass the mic to Fernando.
So, as we previously discussed, the solidarity economy infrastructure creates a way to share resources among people and business, and enables people and business to leverage those resources. But the basic income program is the part that actually offer the resource themselves. That's why the basic income policy has a central role in Maricá. As you can read in the quotes, different people emphasize the main role of the policy in the city. They grant resource and dignity to the beneficiaries. This money is spent on the local commerces and can be used again to buy goods from other Maricá suppliers. This Mumbuca cycle also benefits the Mumbuca Bank, which obtains funds from small transaction taxes to promote zero-interest microcredits. Next slide. The Mumbuca cycle and its policies nowadays work fine, but the City Hall depends too much on oil royalties, around 70% of its budget. And as we all know, fossil resources won't last forever. This model can't last forever. So here, Joaquim de Mello from the Network of Community Banks emphasized the importance of the Mumbuca and basic income as a fundamental tool in the development strategy in the city. With this money going to business and the private sector of Maricá, they can grow and also pay more taxes, giving a new fund opportunity for the city. Next slide. The nowadays Mumbuca and basic income combination is understood by interviewee as good as feasible, but as said priorly, it won't last forever for the same funding. Another aspect that interviewee told was the importance of the Maricá sovereign wealth funds as a way of funding this for the future. Currently, 15% of the royalties received go for these funds, which reached the benchmark of 500 million reais last month. Diego Zeidan, deputy mayor, assures this could be a way of funding social policies in the long term, as well as promotes local developments. The sovereign wealth funds is seen for us, the UF and GFI team, as a way of making limited fossil resource turn into unlimited resource over time. This is the strategy adopted also by several national and subnational entities, the most famous being Government Pension Fund of Norway and Alaska Permanent Funds. Next slides. And so it's all understood as a virtual cycle here by Maricá authorities. Now the City Hall pays the basic income in local currency and grants local developments. With this, the city itself can develop and have other economic activities. As this process goes, the sovereign wealth funds to growing. And this step in the current model to the future model is still seen as a challenge in the words of the former mayor Washington Kwakwa here in these quotes on these slides. Next slides. Another particular feature of Maricá policies that emerge on our interviews is the coexistence of different frameworks for understanding the basic income. Although the basic income has a central role on our perspective as researchers and also by the interviewee, all these concepts, Mumbuka, the basic income policy, and the solidarity economy are often viewed as the same thing. Here's one possible explanation given by Diego Zeidan, that they were implemented jointly, so the institutions and the policy merge into the same thing and the same name. Next slides. The name Bolsa Mumbuka, or simply Mumbuka, are the ones that mostly represents all these concepts and institutions: basic income, cash transfers, social currency, the community bank, and the solidarity economy. So the first explanation by Diego was that they were implemented jointly. Another conception is what we like to call the popular conception. Some interviewee argue that all these terms, like the official name, citizens, basic income, or the Renda Básica Cidadania, RBC, cash transfers, and solidarity economy were too long or too difficult. So the people simply referred it as the simplest and common word in that city, Mumbuka, a name of the river in the downtown, and this word Mumbuka turned into a symbol of all the set of policies. Next slide. Another framework to interpret this set of policies and institutions into one word is a legal perspective. When the first law was created back in 2013, the official name was Renda Mínima Mumbuka, which in the beginning was a focalized cash transfer with poverty relief aspects, similar to the concept of the national worldwide program Bolsa Família. So people adopted, if Brazil has Bolsa Família, here in Maricá we have Bolsa Mumbuka. And that's possibly how the official name back then, Renda Mínima Mumbuka, turned into the non-official Bolsa Mumbuka. Next slide. And the minimum income Mumbuka has poverty relief characteristics. Although the policy has expanded and turned into a very brilliant basic income policy, although the right perspective exists, it is still marked by these backgrounds of poverty relief in the past, linked a lot to a social assistance interpretation of the policy. Next slide. And even today, the basic income has some kinds of social assistance linked to it. People show up to enroll for the Mumbuka in the CRAS, an institution which is managed by the Social Assistance Secretariat. And there, through talks, the employee argued that it's common that they discover that beneficiaries may be in need of more stuff than simply the income provided by the basic income. So they assist them in procedures. Here in the quotes, Glaucia, responsible for a database and other policies on the Secretariat of Social Assistance, tells one example that people usually show up to enroll in the basic income policy in the class without any kind of documents, because they don't have official documents. So it's one service with aspects of social assistance that their secretariats help the beneficiaries to have their official documents and enroll in the basic income policy at the same time. So basic income may have different externalities of this kind that are assessed through social assistance yet. Next slide. Another particular aspect of the basic income that appear recurrently during our interviews is the individual empowerment. The income increase provided by the policy, as well as the liberty spent, might allow people to afford certain needs. Here, Natalia, financial director of the Mumbuka Bank, tells that some people can spend in products that can help improve their self-esteem. And this is important because this may allow the person to feel more confident and study planning. Next slide. More on this individual empowerment perspective is in this quote by Nata Mello, telling that basic income may be especially important for people who work on unpaid care and domestic work, like childcare, elderly care, cooking, cleaning. Especially women in this position that are not paid for these caring activities. For these people, basic income can offer dignity, the freedom to make choices without asking for permission or being judged by other people. It gives a real empower for these people. Next slides. Another interesting perspective on individual empowerment is that it becomes more widespread as the policy was being expanded and also a variety of commerces were becoming part of the network. As Kwakwa, former mayor, said in this quote, this stigma on spending decreased when the middle income became included in the basic income policy, since they have a lot of demands apart from just foods. So they want to buy other stuffs with these benefits, and this leads to a bigger liberty to all of the beneficiaries of this policy. One last perspective that emerged on the talks with the people having spoken to is the basic income as a part of path of citizenship, solidarity, and quality of life. In this quote, Glaucio Oliveira, responsible for policies and data management at the Secretary of Social Assistance, emphasized the dignity aspect, saying that now people can buy the same outfits in the same stores as of other citizens. And this offers the feeling of dignity and equality, offering solidarity between the Maricá citizens. In this quote, she also says that with more money, people can now have more freedom to choose on foods, being able to consume a bigger diversity as well as choose based on other aspects than the costs. Next slide. And continue in this citizenship perspective, here there are two complementary quotes. On the first one, Diego Zaidan, Deputy Mayor, considers basic income as a right, saying that people are already used to having this income. So in this case, income is a vested right, considering the same perspective as health in Brazil, that's been public for a long time. And the second aspect is by Natalia Samarella, Financial Director of the Mumbuka Bank, that says that Mumbuka reinforced the cultural sentiments of being a Maricá inhabitants, as well as the Mumbuka as part of this culture. So for my part, it's done. I will pass the mic to Paul now, which will then conclude the presentation.
Thank you, Fernando. Just to kind of wrap things up quite briefly and amazingly, I think ahead of our time constraint. We've now heard a lot of different frameworks for understanding the basic income benefit and its place in this broader suite of solidarity economy policies meant to transform Maricá as a city and as a site of production. So on one level, these different frameworks compete with each other, and also, of course, with the more explicitly developmentalist perspectives that Roberta was talking about a little bit earlier in the presentation. Yet we were really struck consistently through our interviews that our interview subjects rarely hesitated to combine these different perspectives. They didn't seem to see any contradiction between them. Here we have a quote from Joaquim de Mello, who's the coordinator of the Brazilian Network of Community Banks, saying that taking this money and distributing it to people is not just a humanitarian issue, it is a right and a humanitarian issue. So those things, which might seem incompatible to some, actually work very neatly together. Likewise, from Nathan Melu, who was formerly the research coordinator of the Social Economy Secretariat, he defined the goal of basic income in a single sentence as, quote, to promote human dignity and local development. So again, we see these different perspectives together in one phrase. And these are just two among many, many quotations that we could have cited to make this point. And we think actually that this may owe, at least in part, to the nature of the oil royalties that are undergirding this project. So as we alluded to before, Maricá is currently the beneficiary of a really tremendous oil windfall. The city is the largest per capita recipient of oil royalties in Brazil, right? Offshore drilling in Brazil, a portion of the proceeds are distributed to the national, state, and local governments based on the geography of production. And Maricá happens, for the moment, to be extremely well situated relative to a very productive drilling site. And oil royalties, I think, are immediately legible to people as shared wealth. And so it's possible to understand then that you could have a rights-based claim on a portion of that wealth while also understanding it very immediately as a public resource. So there's something about the particular nature of the kind of origin of these funds, we think, that may help to facilitate this kind of very complex, multidimensional way of understanding these programs. And so here we have a quote from Natalia Samarella, who's the financial director of the Mambuca Bank. She says, the royalties need to come back to the population in some way, not only in the form of infrastructure, but directly in the form of investment, local development, and also to take the population out of extreme poverty, right? That's how it was in the beginning, right? So it's very clear, right, that there are these different coexisting understandings that do seem tied to the royalties as the source of revenue here. Here we see again in this quote from Laura Costa, who's the Subsecretary of Social Assistance, I think royalties are a resource that comes to improve the quality of life. So when it comes to improving the quality of life of citizens, there is nothing better than investing in the citizens themselves, in their quality of life. And finally, from Deputy Mayor Diego Zaidan, we invest through the royalties, through our sovereign wealth fund, but this can yield. The income from the enterprises can sustain municipal policies, basic income, the Mambuca. So here we actually see an explicit contrast to the idea of a kind of one-time windfall from oil royalties. Instead, there's an obligation in this sense to create a basis for kind of ongoing development and actually specifically for financing these policies in the future. So it's not surprising then that perhaps in contrast to the finite nature of oil extraction, many of the people we spoke to used variations on the idea of a cycle to describe the relationship between poverty relief and development. Here again, quoting Natalia, the main motivation back then, it was to end hunger, right? To reduce poverty, right? And that also flows into local development, right? So it's something that Diego Zaidan always says, that it's a cycle of good, a virtuous cycle. And this phrase and variations of it appear repeatedly throughout the interviews. We see them also here in this quote from Laura Costa, again, the Subsecretary of Social Assistance, who maybe didn't immediately find the phrase when we were speaking, which produced a kind of fun moment in our interview with a lot of laughter all around. She said, oh, and so it's a vicious cycle. No. And then we all laughed. It's a good cycle, right? So, I think this notion of a kind of cycle of development seems to be the dominant metaphor, and it makes sense, I think, given the nature of the resources involved and given the broader project to transform the city. And at the center of this cycle, repeatedly in our interviews with, again, the people involved in designing and implementing this program, is that the Mambuca is the engine that drives the virtuous cycle. Here we see this in a quotation from Joaquim de Mello, who says, so the fact that you pay the basic income in social currency makes all the difference, because besides giving assistance to people, it promotes the local economy, right? Likewise, from Igor Sarginha, who's the Secretary of Economic Development of Maricá, he says, making the social currency, the basic income with the social currency. In fact, it was created not only to fight poverty and misery, inequality, but as a tool for economic development. So I think, this cyclical metaphor that combines fighting poverty, empowering people, and promoting economic development may help to explain why, whether this program is formally called Renda Mínima or Renda Básica de Cidadania, the popular conception of it as the Bolsa Mambuca or the Cartão Mambuca really stands at the heart of the project to transform Maricá's economy and its sense of purpose and place. And here to conclude for today, we have a photo of this really cool moment in Maricá, I believe from Carnaval 2020, just before really the pandemic took hold. We have this bloco, right, this street party. Tons of people are out in the street. They're dressed in these shirts that are celebrating the Mambuca. They're holding these banners that say, toss the Mambuca up. People are singing this song, which we have, quoted here to the left on the slide. And I won't sing it. I won't subject you to that. But I will translate it into English. So the song goes, "É de Maricá, esse banco é Maricá," right? This is from Maricá. This bank is Maricá. O dinheiro fica aqui e a cidade vai crescendo. The money stays here and the city grows. É de Maricá, é a moeda social. It's from Maricá. It's the social currency. O dinheiro fica aqui, e o prefeito acha é bom, e o comércio cresceu. The money stays here, the mayor thinks it's good, and business grows. Right? We've got, every line in this is so rich. They all tell us something different about the social currency and how it connects to all of these different elements of the vision that is being advanced here for the transformation of this city. And what's so powerful about this is that it brings so many complex elements together, right? We talked about the influence of this model of community banks, taken in many ways from the Banco Palmas and adapted, and the ideas of the solidarity economy, taken in part from the ideas of Paul Singer, the idea of a basic income, taken in part from Eduardo Suplicy. It brings all of these extremely complex things together, and it concentrates them in a single word, which is also a thing that people can use in their own lives. So it's extraordinarily powerful. And we are so excited to continue investigating its impact as we move forward with this study. So thank you all very much for your time today.
Thank you, Paul, Roberta, and Fernando for the enlightening presentation. Mollona, you can go ahead. You have 20 minutes for your comments.
Boa tarde, eu agradeço ao Fábio Waltenberg, à UFI e a Jain Institute por esse convite. Eu vou falar inglês porque temos tradutor, então mas queria somente falar boa tarde para você em português, mas agora vou falar inglês. Yes, so, well, first I want to thank you for sharing these data with me and for inviting me, because these are already very interesting data. I am an anthropologist working on economic anthropology and on the economy, and so I'm very interested in this project. For one, because it's a project that has the ambition of combining quantitative methodology with the qualitative aspects, and moreover to create a feedback between these two levels of between these methodologies. So this is, I think, very important as anthropologists to have this kind of feedback loop throughout the duration of the program. This, as the speaker already highlighted, I think that the Maricá scheme is incredibly special and extraordinary for the way it combines three, let's say, institutions that are seems to be fundamental for the global economy more generally in a post-pandemic context: the community currency or the electronic currency. There is so much about electronic currencies and discussion about it at the moment, unconditional basic income, and solidarity economy. So the fact that all these three components are combined, it's quite extraordinary. And of course, it's quite extraordinary the fact that the tradition of solidarity economy that's so historically rooted in Brazil is coming up again in this context, and that there is such a thing as a municipal secretary of solidarity economy, which is also quite incredible. So I wanted to go through some of the findings as they've been discussed just now, and try to highlight, I think, what are the, let's say, the interest, at least for me, and the potential, let's say, what are the issues that potentially would be interested to follow up. The first thing that was interesting in your conclusion was the issue of the state stimulating local production. So to use this scheme to stimulate local production, especially cooperatives and especially new forms of entrepreneurship. And the first thing that I think is important is to try to map actually the local economy with the municipality, so that try to understand where is the site of this production, in the sense that we are living obviously in a geographical space that has been subject, let's say, to the deterritorialization of contemporary capitalism. So it would be really interesting to see how it's possible to reconnect, re-stimulate the local economy. Also because a lot of the conversation about UBI in the world are really about the shift from production to redistribution. And so I think it is an important issue. And a lot of the criticism against, for instance, people who historically are opposed to the UBI, such as the trade unions, is that actually they are too productivist. So I think it would be really interesting to try to understand what kind of local economies exist that actually can escape, both to the pure redistributionist approach and to the pure productivist approach. That's one of the, I think, very interesting finding that you have. And so what I obviously as an anthropologist would do, and I'm sure you will do really well, is precisely this qualitative mapping of the possibilities of the local economy. And you are describing also the neighborhood, so that could combine with an analysis of the neighborhood level. Also because, and this leads me to the next point, the idea of the solidarity economy as a state project is also very interesting, because obviously escape from a lot of other narratives that have been thrown around, but also comes with a possible price. The first is the attitude towards the state, that certainly not in Maricá, we're talking about the state, not the local government, which often comes with some kind of antagonism, especially linked probably to more historical project. For instance, the Bolsa Familia has had this kind of component of tension between the recipient and the state. And the other issue that I think is interesting is the other side of it. So the kind of community participation. And so in a sense, it would be interesting to see if in parallel to this role of the state in the economy, there could be an emergence of also forms of grassroots governance. I mean, we don't need to be too imaginative. We could just go back to the national participatory budget, or the experiment that have already been made in Brazil. But I'm sure that this discussion are already there and existent. The other point that I think is very important, has been already mentioned, is how to, let's say, relate basic income and this a kind of a progressive view of the future with the oil revenues, which is it's just obviously. I do agree with Paul that the best, that as also Guy Standing says, that there is a kind of tax or rent on wealth that can be socialized. And so this could be a good way to look at the royalties from the oil. But there is also the issue that a lot of, let's say, communities, a lot of nations are moving away from carbon fossil economy, including Norway, which of course is quite paradoxical because the Norway's oil fund is based on oil, but they are disinvesting in fossil fuel economy. But there is also this issue, so the kind of long-term stability, as you highlight, and more generally of this kind of extractivist economies, which I mean, has been mentioned already, the Alaska Permanent Fund and other forms of redistribution fund linked to the oil economy are not as participatory as surely this project. The other thing that it's really touching about actually your finding is the idea of the basic income as a right, and this shift from the anti-poverty perspective to the perspective of basic income as a right, which is it's incredibly strong, and I think it is perhaps an example to bring globally to all the other let's say pilot project, because I think to have already in a state in which a basic income is considered to be a right, I think it's an incredible achievement. You know, it speaks a lot about how long this project has been in place and how much you know, the kind of democratic, let's say, history and tradition of the place. And it's the other very interesting thing is how you mentioned that the basic income allows citizens to make other demands to the municipality. And that also connects with what Paul was describing, that the solidarity economy is bigger than the basic income. I mean, as an anthropologist, it would be also interesting to see this component of advocacy, how the component of advocacy, how this component of, let's say, grassroots participation to the debate, let's say, it can be built also inside the project. And so this is another thing that, as anthropology, I'm thinking, you know, in the long term, following this project in the long term, there is also a need for a continuous conversation about these issues of rights, this issue of distribution and redistribution, and what are the spaces where this conversation can take place. I'm thinking, for instance, about Guy Standing, who in his pilot in India collaborated with the Union of Unemployed Women to create this kind of level of also advocacy, but also level of kind of following up, you know, durationally, how discussions about distribution, redistribution were taking place. And the last thing is there are two other points quickly. One is the empowerment issue. That is also incredibly important, as you described, the shift from the distribution at the level of the household to individual distribution allow women, for instance, to get, let's say, to have this money and to spend them how they want. And I think, you know, that this is probably something to follow up both with the interview to the participant, to the recipient, but also in the longer term, in the sense that we know that money is not enough to empower. And there were similar issues also with the Bolsa Familia, that when women receive, let's say, some kind of conditional income, they were put under pressure, both by in the household, but also by the conditionality of it, let's say. But this is certainly another, let's say, qualitative but important aspects of this project is really important. And the other issue that it's also I think important from the point of view of let's say social relation or local politics is this idea of middle class and working class. The fact that the scheme is universal can also be controversial in terms of you know, perception of wealth and wealth inequalities. As we know, the biggest benefits of this kind of universal income is precisely to redirect some of the wealth inequalities. And we know also that even if it's universal, so even if the middle class get this benefit, even so, there is still a kind of an effect of redistribution and in terms of wealth inequality. But still, perhaps there are some problem of perception of the universality. So this is another issue that I think would be very, very interesting to follow. I have finished with my points, and I really thank you for this amazing already research and for inviting me.
Thank you, Mollona, for your comments. Roberta, Fernando, and Paul, you can respond to the comments now.
So thank you for your great comments, Mo. And there's so much content, but we try to get the few main points, and we'll speak about it, and each one of us will speak a bit of some of them. So one that I'd like to begin is that this link of this funding of social policy with this carbon fossil funding, that seems like a lot like 20th century, but we are in the 21st century. But I guess we in Brazil, we had, and internationally, we had great experience of this transition of making this fossil funding to make a transition to find resources into long-lasting resources that are sustainable and not do some kind of carbon damage or some kind of nature damage. So one example internationally, as I said in presentations, that's the Norway pension funds that sustains the welfare states. Another example is that the Alaska Permanent Funds that is a large fund and also sustains the basic income in that states. And in Brazil especially, we have prior examples of cities, even states of Rio, that had very bad experiences with oil royalties priorly. So it was a very 20th century mentality that was just, oh, we won the lottery, so it's like, oh, a lot of money. And then these cities were like just doing, I mean, there are good funding for a few years, but not forever. And then the cycle of the petroleum fields ends, and the cities doesn't develops. So what we notice that the city has trying to do with this, and also other cities in Brazil are doing the same thing, is that they are structuring sovereign wealth funds in this way, so they can save part of these resources and make them reinvested into financial sector or other productive sectors as they wish. So part of the money that comes now is reinvested into the sovereign wealth funds. And currently we have these in 3 cities, Maricá, Niterói, and Ilhabela, and another one in Espírito Santo, the States. So I guess this strategy could be a way of making these fossil resources turn into a long-lasting funding for these social policies and other development strategies that the city wants to implement. This was a little bit long, sorry, but I'll just briefly speak on the shift from anti-poverty, from poverty relief to the rights perspective. But I guess what's very important to focus is that these things, Maricá is not an ideal place where everyone is like, we love basic income. These things coexist at the same time. So there's this anti-poverty perspective, and also there's this universal perspective, this rights perspectives. So these things coexist at the same time and they interact with each other, and they're all complemented and make this virtual cycle. That's Paul showing the concluding remarks here. So yes, it's a tool for giving money can provide these opportunities for demanding more rights, but at the same time, these things keep coexisting. So that's my part. I don't. I guess it's Paul now or Roberta.
Yeah, just adding to what Fernando just said about the shift from anti-poverty to of thinking of the RBC as anti-poverty to rights. I think that has to do obviously with the history of the program. Like we said during our presentation, for instance, it was first thought as, even if it was inside the whole idea of a program of economic solidarity, they were thinking in a frame that was, what can we do right now with the money that we have, because we know the real world has budgetary constraints. And so, for instance, the first program, the minimum income program, they were thinking, okay, let's help people who are more in need right now because it's what we can do. And then they started build up on top of that. So you have a shift in the program themselves. So we're going to have a shift in people's thinking along the way as the program itself changes. And I think that's very interesting and something that we are still going to analyze a lot. But also something that I think is related to this comment that you made about the question, the discussion about universality and how that's some people think it's problematic to give money, for instance, to people who are not poor but maybe middle class. Actually, what we got from this interview so far is that, which is something that I think was in one of Kwakwa's quote in the presentation, was that the fact that when they were adding more people to the program, the more recipients were being added from the middle class. Actually, the program started to be more well received by the city, and we can't speak about stigma completely yet, because we do have some few notions from these people, but when we talk to the recipients, we're going to know a lot more about this. But from the perspective of the people with whom we have spoken, the stigma has somewhat reduced because of that, because more middle class households are participating in the program. So I think there's going to be some tension there, the whole idea of middle class receiving the benefits, and at the same time it becoming more accepted because of that. And I think that's very interesting to look at. And it's also interesting to think that the benefit right now, the basic income program, it's not universal, not yet. The city does plan to make it universal, but it's interesting to think how even if it's not strictly universal yet, it's a large portion of the city that's receiving the benefits. So we can already think like, okay, so we have, let's say we have a somewhat targeted program, but can a target program that encompass that benefits a large portion of the city, can we see already some benefits of what would be the benefits from a universal income? So would that be enough? Even, okay, we cannot do a universal income because we don't have the budget for that, but if we can maybe help, I don't know, a third of the population, as the kind of is the case of the basic income program, we can already see some benefits from that, some benefits that we only imagined coming from universal income. So I think that's also a very interesting idea that has to do with your comments. And I have spoken too much already, so I'm gonna pass the word to Paul.
Well, thank you, Roberta, and thank you, Mal, for those really spectacular comments, which I really think underscore just how many directions there are to take this research project, and which, I mean, feels both kind of like overwhelming sometimes. I'm sure Roberta and Fernando can agree to that, but also really very exciting. I guess I just wanted to say a couple quick things to add to what Roberta and Fernando have already said. I think perhaps in part because of kind of the scale of Maricá's ambition and of what they've implemented, there's just no way that any particular kind of single group of researchers could, tell us anywhere near everything that we would like to know about what's happening in Maricá. So one of the things that has been so exciting from the beginning is like the ability to collaborate with lots of different groups and researchers who are working on, different aspects of the program, and of course yourself included. But also I'm thinking here specifically in response to your, I think, extremely valuable suggestion that it would be really great to kind of map the local economy and understand how chains of production and distribution are changing in Maricá. That actually, I think, a really valuable partner in this is the Instituto Darcy Ribeiro, which is the city-linked research institute that is based in Maricá, which is actually in the process of undertaking a really remarkable economic census of the city. The idea is to register every single business in the city and to map them out. So I mean, we are just kind of overwhelmingly excited to be in conversation with him really from the beginning about this, so that we can figure out how we can also together I think build insights from I think this really remarkable project that is going to open a lot of interpretive doors. I just wanted to add briefly, it's already been discussed, Fernando spoke about it already, but the question is sort of the kind of uncomfortable place of oil in all of this is something that I know at least I have been thinking a lot about, just kind of on a personal sort of ethical level. It's sort of hard, as it seems like humanity is hurtling toward climate disaster, to feel unqualified good about anything that is derived, from oil royalties. I think that's just, a fact of kind of being human in 2021. But I guess the way that I think about it is that these royalties are coming, and there's nothing that could be done with them that could possibly be better than the construction of an economy that actually could serve as an alternative to this extractive model. But I mean, I think at the same time, anytime you are, building, even just on the balance sheet, right, funds that have oil royalties as their main source of revenue, it's hard not to worry about path dependency and about the new constituencies that creates. And I don't think that there's a resolution to these issues. I certainly don't think that the alternative of not trying to do these kinds of transformative projects with this money is in any way a better solution. But I think kind of just accepting and kind of sitting with the kind of ethical complexity of this project is really important and should always be front and center. So I'm very grateful for you for stressing that. I guess the last thing that I wanted to say is about the kind of basically the transformation of Maricá's economy and how that might kind of engage lots of other things that lots of other people have been saying about how economies should be restructured. So in particular, I mean, I've been kind of active in at least the kind of graduate student faction of the labor movement in the United States. Was briefly a staff organizer for the UAW at Columbia. It's certainly in that context, if anyone had known that several years later I would be working on a basic income project, this is 6 or 7 years ago, people would have been extremely upset because that was untouchable at that point. The whole idea of basic income in the minds of comrades from organized labor, at least in the United States, is, well, this is about taking power away from us. So we don't actually have negotiation over how resources are distributed. Instead, they're going to come top down from somewhere else. My own thinking about this, of course, has changed radically in the last several years. But I do think that, kind of fundamentally, right, what you've said, that this is kind of an alternative in a way to, it's sort of reframing or relocating the kind of politics of distribution. But I think the fact that it's relocating that to a place which has real opportunities for popular input is very valuable in this particular case. And I think it sets apart the basic income program in Maricá from any other that I am personally familiar with, right? I mean, at its heart, the institution at the center of that probably much too complex, perhaps not clarifying at all chart that we shared at the beginning of the presentation, is the Banco Mambuca, right? Which is an organization which is extraordinarily horizontal, where it really actually does operate and is structured as a cooperative. I think that's really unusual, and that is, I think, an indication that there are other ways to think about the distribution of power that are kind of outside our traditional frameworks for collective bargaining. And the question is, how does that work at scale? And I mean, I don't think any of us kind of know the answer, but I just wanted to say in closing, and I mean, Roberta and Fernando, apologize for speaking too long, but now I'm showing them up by actually speaking too long. There was an essay that that it was published really recently in the Boston Review here in the United States. It was like a review of a book about Albert Hirschman, right, the economist, who basically the thesis of this book, which is really explored very well in this essay, is like a deep skepticism toward anyone who claims out of hand that they have a scheme for explaining how the world should work and all we need to do is follow it. That actually what we need to do is like be ambitious, do things step by step in the world, and then reassess at each step to figure out how to move forward. And I really think that that fits for kind of these broader questions of like, how does what is happening in Maricá relate to broader questions of political economy in the state of Rio, in Brazil, in the world? And I mean, we don't know, but one thing that is really interesting is what's happening in Niterói, right, the city in between Rio and Maricá. And in Niterói now, they've created a community bank, which has just been launched. They're going to have their own local currency called the Arariboya, and that is going to be used to pay a local a benefit, spendable only in the city of Niterói, to I think about 90,000, maybe. I mean, please don't quote me on that. I shouldn't even have used a number, but some portion of city residents. And this is, I mean, the fact that these two adjacent cities are now going to have these two banks working together that are presumably going to be part of the same larger network of community banks, I think it's, who knows how these could intersect, but I think it kind of shows the power of this, let's call it like Hirschmanian kind of step-by-step building block approach. And I think that this project in Maricá is especially amenable to it, because at least my experience in these interviews is that the people we're speaking to are like much less doctrinaire than usual. They identify problems, they seek to find solutions to those problems, and I think that those are going to offer opportunities for continued growth in ways that we can't even anticipate right now.
Thank you, Roberta, Fernando, and Paul. We have received many questions in the chat. I'll start with 3 questions from Celia, Milena, and Jürgen. Is there a cap for the share of basic income in the overall budget that comes from royalties? Do we have an idea of how much goes to social services in general, health, education, etc.? And even with no royalties, would it be possible to replicate Maricá's experience in nearby cities like São Gonçalo using other sources? And on understanding oil royalties as a shared wealth and a right, I wonder how you compare the very state-focused framing in Maricá with the, for example, strong anti-state narrative you find in Alaska with the permanent fund dividend.
So thank you for these questions. I'd like to begin by the Celia's question. So we don't have the exact value of how much royalties go to the budget of the city, but it's around 70% of the budget of the city from the last number we had, I guess from 2019. And this 70% of the budget goes to the city hall. And the city hall, it's share this basic income, all these policies, cash income transfers that we spoke here, they don't represent the biggest budgets in the city hall. They all seem like, oh, they're very big, but when you see the budgets of the city hall, there are bigger priorities. So the health secretariat, the education, and also the infrastructure secretariat are the 3 bigger secretaries of a lot of budgets. And then comes social assistance and the solidarity economy secretariat. One important thing that's probably we didn't point out is that Maricá wasn't a developed city, so these royalties, when they came in, it gave the opportunity to the city for do like all kinds of things and change in the city. So when you go there, you see like everywhere things are changing. They're doing all kind of infrastructure work. So I would say that this is the main focus of their budgets, and the social assistance and cash transfers, they are representative. There are good aspects, but in the budgets they seem there are a bit less. Just points out the exact numbers. I remember that for 2019 it was around 3% of the budgets of the city, when the basic income was around 130%, 130 Mumbucas. And then last year, when there was this expansion to 300 Mumbucas and also a lot of cash transfers complementary, it was around 10%. But this is very rough calculation that we did, and these other secretariats have bigger budgets. So these other questions I'll let you, Roberta and Paul.
Well, I mean, just to speak very briefly, I guess, to this idea of royalties as a kind of shared right. I mean, so clearly there's a very different perspective at work, kind of at least the dominant perspective, it seems, at work in Alaska. But you know, I actually think that kind of both Maricá and Alaska are departing from a shared understanding of oil royalties as a reflection of kind of a claim that citizens have on the resources of the collectivity. And you know, I think it's just it's very easy to say that oil is one of those shared resources. I mean, it seems quite a bit easier because it doesn't involve directly taking from anyone. Whereas, you know, a kind of similar scheme that's funded through taxation does involve kind of taking from people, right? So, I mean, clearly within that broader kind of under this broader umbrella, I mean, it's clear that Maricá is offering a perspective which is, you know, much more centered on collective decision making, whereas Alaska, you know, in a sense, they are making collective decisions, but very much framed in the language of libertarianism, right, and of actually getting money directly to people. And of course, as many people know, right, the Alaska Permanent Fund was actually created under a Republican governor. The Permanent Fund dividend was also created under a Republican governor. So, I mean, and they're very, and that's the party of the right in the United States, of the far right now. So, you know, I mean, I think they're two different ends of the spectrum, but I do think that they share quite a bit in common. Maybe they speak a little bit also to this question of what is possible in other cities that don't have oil royalties. I mean, I think the answer is, of course, that we don't know, right? But I mean, the infrastructure that has been built here in Maricá, and I think that we trace the kind of different elements of, is not dependent on royalties. I think the fact that the inputs are coming from royalties in many ways makes this less conflictual than it would be in other places. But I mean, societies have resources, right? And then they need to decide how those resources are distributed. And even if we're thinking only about royalties, right, the overwhelming lion's share of oil royalties in Brazil go to the federal government. So it's not as if the only opportunity to use royalties to advance kind of other social visions, you know, are happening at the municipal level. But I mean, fundamentally, right, there's no doubt that the scenario becomes much more complex when you're thinking about funding schemes that also do involve redistribution instead of different schemes of distribution. So no doubt about that.
Thank you. I'm going to combine other questions from the chat from Emmanuel and from Pedro. Could you explain in more detail how the use of Mumbuca boosts citizens' sense of belonging to the city of Maricá and their self-esteem? And Carolina also brought up in the chat a philosophical point of view where we wonder, how can this impact one's life when moving out, for example? Are there any plans in the research to measure this character of the benefit, like the sense of belonging to the city, in any type of survey or interview?
Yes, just to remember right now what we have, the data that we have is from the people who were involved with the basic income program at different levels. So all that we are saying here comes from our analysis of their point of view. So the easy part of the question, yes, we plan to investigate this in the qualitative survey with the recipients. This last, the sense of belonging to the city, as Carolina put it in her question. And we do plan to investigate this, and also how the Mumbuca, how can I say this? Sorry. We also want to see how the Mumbuca and the basic income program affects people's lives in the sense of their citizenship, of how they how they can perform their citizenship, how they feel them, how they feel like if they have more liberty to do that, if they have more freedom to, like Mao mentioned in his comments, if they have more freedom now to demand their rights, and how that interacts with their notion that the Mombuca, the basic income program, is also a right. So we do plan to investigate that from the recipients. So we can say a lot from their perspective right now, but we can definitely what we can see from the interviews that we have done so far is that in I think all of them, everyone mentions this sense of how they can see that the city is feeling more, it's growing an identity, which they feel like this identity wasn't there before, and it has started to grow with, like Paul mentioned, with the different types of developments in the city since the beginning of the administration from Washington Kwakwa, and especially with the Mombuca. And the whole idea how that became something from the city that is actually now inspiring so many other projects in cities nearby, and is actually being talked about a lot in the media, and not just nationally but also internationally. So that we can see in the reviews how that is boosting people's sense of propriety, as one of the interviewees said. So what we have, and from these types of comments, that's what we are getting, that the Mombuca boosts citizens' sense of belonging to the city of Maricá. We don't know exactly about their self-esteem yet, but from their perspective, of course, but from everyone involved in the program, especially the people who have interactions daily with recipients, they always say that people feel a lot like they have more freedom to make choices, basically, and to not only make choices. We're not talking about only of people feeling like they can afford to eat, for instance. So though, of course, that's important, but also people are having more, they are feeling more empowered to, for instance, to buy things that they might not have been, they probably weren't able before because they didn't have the income, but also that the notion, the idea of the RBC, of the basic income program as a right is giving them the feelings that they can buy whatever they want. So it's boosting people's self-esteem in this sense of this freedom of choice, and feeling like they are allowed to do this. And I think, which it's something that for me comes a lot in the interviews, is what I said before. I think this is also what definitely is it's related, is this idea that now we have more people from the middle class receiving the benefits. So I think that has a huge impact on how people perceive the recipients, and also perceive what they're buying, and how the recipients see themselves. But yet again, we'll hopefully next year have more to say about this from the recipient's point of view.
Okay, thank you. So I'll ask two questions from Leandro and from Victor. At this point, we are very aware that Maricá has this windfall situation in terms of oil revenue. The city is building up with the RBC program. My question is universality a shared value among local leaders? How is it perceived? Does it belong to the imaginary goals in the city, or are there conservative barriers to be broken yet? And is there evidence that Maricá's economic structure started to change since the introduction of the solidarity policies? Has any sector started to contribute more to local economic growth since then? Was there an increase, for example, in participation of the industrial sector?
Well, those are great questions. Thank you. I'll try to be brief. I'm conscious of the time. So, I mean, the question of transformations in Maricá's economy. I mean, I think it's kind of I think it's premature to say. There were lots of ambitions about driving changes in Maricá's economy. There's a local development corporation, Codemar, which has been working to create, pools of production in the city. The Solidarity Economy and the Banco Mambuca have, programs centered on the creation of collectives, which we know actually are going to be, leading to the creation of at least some new enterprises. And we can, trace through the Banco Mambuca that there is, a really robust microcredit program that has enabled, many businesses to make particular investments. But sort of what those all look like in their totality, I think these are questions that it's going to take a lot of researchers approaching all of these things from lots of different angles to answer. And fortunately, it seems like that's what we've got. The set of researchers working around Codemar is very impressive. The set of researchers at the Instituto Darcy Ribeiro, which I mentioned, is quite impressive. So it really does actually seem that there are endless opportunities for study and for collaboration here. Also, I should mention the Financialization and Development Study Group at UFI is also involved in addressing these kinds of questions. So I think the answer is right now we really only have the very basic kind of descriptive data that Fabio presented in his presentation with Sidya yesterday. That we know, right, just in a very crass way, that Maricá has continued to add jobs throughout the pandemic. That I believe there's been no single quarter where Maricá has lost any jobs. I think maybe there were 2 months at the beginning of the pandemic, but I think no entire quarter. We also know that it is the municipality in the state of Rio that has seen the greatest formal sector job growth in the last 4 years, despite not being actually like a pull of production related to oil. The oil is offshore and they're getting royalties, but it's not as if the kind of operations are really happening in Maricá. So that I think is one indication, but it doesn't really tell us about anything, not even granular, even like meso level. So that's really what we're excited to learn. And then in the process of answering that, I had managed to forget the first question.
If there are any barriers within the local leaders to the universality of the program.
Oh, yeah. Well, this has been an extraordinarily interesting dimension of our interviews, I feel like, because there's no doubt that the horizon of universality is very important to the leadership. By which I mean kind of the expansion toward a universal benefit. I don't think that means that everyone is in agreement that 100% of the population of Maricá needs to receive this benefit. But I think that there is broad agreement that the horizon should be one of universalization. I don't know if that distinction is sufficiently clear, but certainly the program will continue to expand. And I think it's important to know that there are different ways to understand kind of universality and guaranteed income in general. So just to briefly say, at the Jain Family Institute, which is where I work, which is where I'm sitting right now, there is I think we prefer to use the term guaranteed income versus universal basic income because, I think there are many ways that cash transfers can help to create, for instance, an income floor. Is that universal? Well, you could argue, right, that it is, that we all would have there would be kind of a universal guarantee of staying above a particular income, for instance. So, I think that if we can think in expansive terms about universality, then yes, there is that shared commitment. But I don't think that means everyone is in agreement that 100% of residents will be receiving this benefit.
Well, thank you. Thank you, everyone, for participating. Thank you for all the questions. We haven't answered a lot of the questions, but thank you for engaging with us. I think that concludes this panel. We have reached the time limit. So I would like to thank everyone again for participating, Roberta, Paul, Fernando, and Mollona, and everyone that's the audience. I remind you that at 3 p.m. and 5 p.m. there will be other 2 panels on Latin America, and we will have simultaneous interpretation from Spanish to Portuguese. So I invite everyone to participate. And we linked the next activity in the chat. All these panels will also be available on YouTube for you to watch later. Thank you and have a great day, everybody.